The $1 billion fortune argument. I found this whole episode fascinating, and you argued for the side that yes, Taylor Swift does deserve her $1 billion fortune. Can you get into the spirit of that argument and why Taylor Swift deserves her billions?
Well, part of it is I think that it's a really big mistake for people to focus on wealth inequality instead of focusing on poverty simpliciter. And the same kinds of global institutions that are the best for people who are genuinely living in poverty, like the very worst off, those institutions are the ones that produce wealth inequality and billionaires like Taylor Swift. And the billionaire class, especially, comes from industries that are especially good in egalitarian terms in a way, because a lot of times it's industries where the marginal cost of additional production is extremely low, but the gains to innovation are super high. And so if you look at like billionaires in like entertainment or tech, where it's like a lot of like innovation, IP type stuff. I mean, IP is like not like a free market per se because it's a state-backed monopoly, but it's a market intervention that's supposed to induce innovation. And like those market interventions that are supposed to induce innovation, we want innovation to be really accessible at a low cost to as many people as possible. So like the internet, Spotify. But when you have that and everybody around the world can listen to Jay-Z or watch LeBron James or choose Taylor Swift at the same price as their less preferred option, when you see someone get like a ton of wealth out of that kind of industry, it's because that was everybody's first choice. And their second choice couldn't compete against the first choice on price. So that's like good for people who don't have a lot of resources, that those industries are structured in that way. And then people see billionaires and they're like, oh, we hate that, as if they think that like redistributing and discouraging people from being billionaires would be good for the worst off. Like, no, like the billionaires are an artifact of an economic system that's better for the worst off.
Yeah. Because one of the things that popped up into my head while I was listening to the debate is, okay, if you taxed Taylor Swift out of her billionaire status or you limited her in some way, maybe like would that have an effect on other artists having a bigger voice? Would putting limits on Taylor Swift, limits on Taylor Swift's wealth, would that open up space in the music market, which I imagine is why a lot of people would argue for something like that, not just for the wealth side of it, but the creative aspect of it.
Yeah.
I don't think that it really would. I don't think if you limited Taylor Swift's wealth that people would all of a sudden decide to listen to someone else, or it would really have any sort of marginal effect on an artist who was never going to pop, making them pop to the level of Taylor Swift. Maybe they might have to wait a little bit longer if that even is the case, but I don't really see limiting the wealth of Taylor Swift shifting the spacing of which artists pop and which artists don't.
Yeah, and I think that's a very like zero-sum mindset of thinking like, oh, we only have so much time that we're going to devote on the radio or like to listening for, to music. But it could be positive sum. It could be that people who weren't that interested in listening to music in general get really into Taylor Swift, and then they start exploring all of the other artists. So like my kids, some of them really, like my third kid, she loves Taylor. And then she got really into Lana and Olivia Rodrigo, and she wouldn't have been into any of that stuff if she didn't start by listening to Taylor Swift. And so it's positive externalities for other artists.
I'm curious, is there a philosophical or an ethical argument for or against algorithms? Like something like the Spotify algorithm that will show you more of what you like, and it's trying to latch on to your creative spine and sort of juice that for all it's worth. Like, is there a philosophical argument for or against that? Why it could be a good or bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, philosophers they've written a lot about the AI stuff. And one question is, how paternalistic should these algorithms be? So should they just be like giving you what you want, or should they try to like steer you in a morally better direction or steer you towards stuff that's like a little outside your comfort zone aesthetically? And so, you'll see Spotify will sometimes like push stuff that like I've never heard before. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, I hate this.
Yeah.
Like I just like, but I mean,
But it
I think
also
that
helps
there's
you
like,
figure out what you hate. I think that's
yeah,
important too, to be like,
that's true.
I hate this. I don't want to listen to this. And that can open up something else where you're like, oh, I
Yeah.
never would have found this if I didn't hate this.
Yeah, that's true. And like, I also think like if Spotify has an interest in doing that because they think that they could like expand their market, like that's okay. I think part of what people worry about with it is that like the algorithm will just be like feeding everybody stuff that they already like. It'll be like
Mm.
overly affirming and it'll lead to like polarization or echo chambers or something like that. Um, but I think that the problem's not the algorithm, the problem's the people. That like that is what people want. Like it's the consumer.
So you think the algorithm is showing more? Do you think the algorithm is showing people more of what they want, and that innate desire to be in an echo chamber would exist with or without the algorithm? The algorithm
That's my
might be
thought.
enhancing that or accelerating that, but these echo
Yeah.
chambers would exist regardless.
Yeah, it's meeting a need for people. Like it's scratching some kind of an itch. And like maybe that's not good for them, but the problem's the consumer, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like algorithmic porn in a way where you're sort of like edging yourself with news stories or different preferences at times.
Yeah.
Um,
Or it's like when people are like, why is my timeline full of all of this like disgusting, horrible content? And I was like, I don't know. What are you clicking on?
yeah,
Like,
you do. I've noticed that. I'll run self experiments where I will not click on certain things, or I'll click on frogs or puppies or whatever, and I'll see my Instagram homepage just changes instantly because they're like, oh,
yeah,
he clicked on a frog video. Let's show
yeah.
him
This dude
13
loves
more.
frogs.
Exactly, dude loves frog. Clicked on a baseball highlight. Let's show him 14 more baseball. So it changes
Yeah.
pretty dramatically and pretty quickly. And I have seen, I think it was YouTube who recently sent out a survey. I don't know if it was a beta thing or it went out to all users, but it asked you, do you want to see more things that don't necessarily align with your preferences? Something along those
Yeah.
lines. And they would show you that 20% of the time or 40% of the time, whatever they picked. And
Uh-huh.
maybe you could scale that personally in the future. I want my feed to be 50-50, or I want my feed to be
Yeah.
70-30 of what I agree with, what I don't. So I think that's also pretty cool.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people are not going to seek it out because they don't want it. They don't like it.
Yeah.
They don't want they don't want to hear people that disagree with them or think that they're wrong.
Yeah. But it also is fun to hate watch though. Like even if you aren't doing it out of the desire to learn more, if you listen or watch something that you don't like, and I don't know exactly what's going on in my brain, but there's part of it that keeps me watching even though I may not agree with anything, or maybe I think it's so bad. Like part of my brain's like, no, you need to hate this. Like you like hate watch it, finish this 6-minute video, and then you're gonna fucking like talk about how much you hate it to someone else, and then like you're gonna, and maybe through that hate you'll learn something or you'll discover something new about yourself.
What
But
are you hate watching?
there's, what do I hate watch? I mean, there will be there's kind of like an underworld that started of people hating on certain comedians. So like a lot of
Mm,
popular comedians that I myself like, I will watch content that shits on these comedians, and it doesn't stop me from watching the content of the
yeah.
comedian that person is shitting on. But like it's almost like reverse hate watching where I go,
Yeah.
I know Tom Segura is a great comedian, and this 15-minute video is just going to tell me all about why he isn't, and I want to see why he
I
isn't
can see
and the
that.
points that this person's making. And I don't know if I'm getting angry because I'm realizing that this person has a point, or I'm hating that they're I hate that they hate the person I
Right.
like. But there is definitely like I've noticed there's a definitive difference in how I feel emotionally when I'm watching that comedy underworld versus
Mm.
just another stand up or another person's breakdown that is more in agreement with me.
Huh.
Yeah. So in the debate, which
Yeah.
also your publication Wealth Without Limits, which
Hmm.
you draw on a ton in the debate. You argue that billionaires are typically in a better position to benefit the poor and solve collective actions than public officials.
Yeah.
What makes this so? Like, is it that our government is so shit that our best hope is to gamble on pop star spending? Like, what makes Taylor Swift or billionaires like her having the money better than giving it to public officials and government?
A few things. So usually like the ordinary billionaire is like not a huge philanthropist. They'll just be putting their money in like the market in some way. They'll just be investing in other businesses. And when you see that a business is profitable, that's because that business was providing a good or service to people that they thought it was worth it to pay for, so that they valued it. And there's like a positive sum exchange there. Meanwhile, the way that the government gets money is by forcing people to give it to the government. And there's like very little accountability for the government to actually deliver services to the people who need it the most, to deliver
Mm.
services that people genuinely value. So look at like the US healthcare system. So what is like the US government spending money on? Social Security, which is a basic income for old people, Medicare, Medicaid, so healthcare for old people and low income people, defense,
Hmm.
interest.
Yeah.
um, so like if you were like to think like, oh, like how are we going to spend this like massive amount of money? Like, would you spend it on those things? Like, probably not. And so putting it into a business, which is like freely exchanging with people in a positive some way and like making our lives more productive and making everybody more prosperous, I don't think that's a bad thing, even if they're not doing anything philanthropic for the billionaires. I think that even that, just investing, is like already going to have some presumptive advantages or a lot of what government spending is doing. And then
Yeah.
second, when we do see billionaire philanthropy, a lot of times it's for the global poor. And so there's no accountability for the US government for people who are non-citizens. But if you look at like the Gates Foundation, for example, they're doing massive public health interventions throughout Africa and South Asia, which is like really beneficial for the people who are the poorest people in the world. And so they don't have incentives, nationalistic incentives, to divert resources to people who are already relatively rich. And
Mm.
so even low income people in America are at a global scale quite well off. And so when you do see billionaire philanthropy and it's addressing like global causes or collective action problems like climate change, those are like probably going to be doing more for the people who really, really need that assistance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I've realized more and more as I'm traveling these past three and a half years, especially. I'm based in Panama right now. I was in Egypt, uh, Colombia for a little bit, and there's a level of poor in those countries and the country that I'm in right now in many parts that you don't really see in the US, or at least in a lot of the places that I've been. Like there's a level of poverty where you look at a shack and you go like there's no way a person lives in that. Like there's no way that's an
Yeah.
abandoned property. And then someone will walk out and start hanging up their laundry and I'm like holy shit, like
Yeah.
this is crazy. And so yeah, I feel like there's a lot of lack of comparison now where we compare the upper and lower levels in America, especially if you were born in the United States, but you don't really think about what that sort of bottom floor is going to be if you travel to somewhere else.
And like, yeah, I mean, totally. And in those countries, like they benefit from American innovation and prosperity and from like the American market as well, right? Like pharmaceutical innovation, for example, like once you have a drug invented, anybody in the whole world can use it. And then once it's off patent in the United States, it becomes like massively accessible. And so there's like ways in which like having economic growth worldwide is really good for people. Like what's going to get people out of poverty throughout the world? It's
Hmm.
it's probably not going to be the Gates Foundation even. It's just going to be economic development. Like that's the main thing, that like that's the most important thing for people in those countries. But then even if they're not experiencing rapid economic development yet, they still benefit from the innovation that comes from economic development in other places. I mean,
Yeah.
people in America do have like serious problems with affording things, affordability. But part of that is a structural feature of being in a really highly productive society. So the more productive your economy gets, the more susceptible you are to this thing called cost disease, which is basically that the cost of labor, the cost of labor increases way faster than the cost of other things, because laborers, in order to compete for services, you have to compete against other industries like tech or manufacturing or whatever that are super productive. So even if the thing that like a doctor or a childcare worker, or a teacher or somebody, even if those people aren't really doing much different than they were 100 years ago, the fact that in order to get those like high skilled, high potential productivity workers into your industry, you have to compete with more productive industries. And so the wages go up. So like that is a problem with like the American economy, that like education and healthcare is really expensive. I don't think taxing billionaires is going to address it. Like the reason that we have like these affordability problems in America is because America is so productive that it means that the price of labor is like really high. It also means though that purchasing power is really high for everybody. And that's why people can get like a bunch of cheap material goods really easily. So it's kind of like, but I don't think like setting a hard cap on like how rich somebody can be is going to solve that. That's just a kind of economic fact.
So when it comes to the ethics of billionaires, or the ethics of if there was a hard cap to be set, do you see billionaires in different buckets, like Taylor Swift, where she's gotten rich off of direct creative transactions, mostly like tours, tickets, streams? People want to listen to her and her net worth increases. And then you have inheritance, you have investments, you have just a whole ton of different ways where you can become wealthy and sustain wealth. Do you see those in different buckets ethically, or are they all one thing?
I think it's usually pretty hard for people to maintain ultra rich status across 3 generations. So when people are like, oh, this person has a generational wealth, of course that does matter for like where people start and where they go. But I think that's kind of overstated. I think most people who have extreme wealth, usually it's a combination of like, you know, they got really lucky, but then also they invested in something that was really innovative, or they invented something really innovative. And so they created like a new project. Often it is the product of some kind of creative innovation that was like beneficial for a lot of people. And then the other way that you can get it is through a kind of like crony capitalism, rent seeking type thing, like claiming a monopoly on natural resources, or I mean, in some ways the patent system is like this as well, but definitely like people who get billions of dollars because they can control like all of the oil in the country or something like that. But it would be weird if like the argument against having billionaires was focused on those people who are like the undeserving billionaires who are just there through like rent seeking and the crony capitalism and government favors, because then you're saying that the government is so dysfunctional and unreliable that it enabled these, you know, oligarchic billionaire class people to like exploit a bunch of natural resources for personal gain. And therefore we should empower the government. Like, it's just like, well, wait a minute. It's like the same thing for those billionaires. So like, I agree those billionaires aren't like a great look for the ultra rich, but like the reason that they're there is because of government failure.